Hello, I'm Carolyn Baker, and it's the second day of 2024. I'm wishing all of you a safe, peaceful, and growth-filled new year. And to that end, my guest today is an animal communicator, Nancy Windheart from Santa Fe, New Mexico. Nancy is an internationally recognized animal communicator and interspecies communication teacher based in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and she teaches courses and training programs in interspecies communication, as well as Reiki for both lay people and those who wish to practice professionally. And she provides animal communication consultations and professional mentoring for clients and practitioners worldwide. Nancy's work has been featured on television, on radio, in print magazines and online media, and she's written for several digital and print publications, including the online journal Dark Matter Women Witnessing, and her essay Guru Cat is included in The Karma of Cats, Spiritual Wisdom from Our Feline Friends, which was published by Sounds True in 2019. Nancy's life's work is to create deeper harmony between species and on our planet through interspecies communion, connection, and communication. Now, the reason that Nancy and I are having this conversation today is that a couple of weeks ago, we talked about my book, Confronting Christo-Fascism, Healing the Evangelical Wound. I'm mentioning that book again today because Nancy and I both grew up in evangelical Christianity. And while we want to talk a bit about both of our backgrounds, we also want to talk about one of the core values of evangelical Christianity, namely Dominionism, which directly relates to Nancy's work in the world and mine. So welcome, Nancy.
Hi, Carolyn. Thank you so much for agreeing to have this conversation and for inviting me. I'm looking forward to talking with you more.
Yeah, me too. So here we are in the second day of 2024, and honestly, I wish I could be more optimistic about the coming year, but the political and cultural scene at the moment is so heavily influenced by evangelical Christianity that it's difficult not to be anxious about that. How are you feeling about that today?
Yeah, I'm feeling pretty anxious too. And I think there's with good reason, right? There's a lot to be anxious about. And I don't know about you, but I know for me, kind of managing the anxiety that has come up, especially in these last several years, is, kind of a constant practice for
Yeah,
me.
it
Uh,
certainly is. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Um,
Go ahead. Did you have more to
Yeah, no,
say?
that's it. I don't have any more to say about that.
Well, we'll get into it. I know we
Yeah.
will. So before we start talking about dominionism, I'd like to offer the definition of it from Wikipedia, which says, Dominion theology is a Christian political ideology that seeks to institute a nation governed by Christians based on their understanding of biblical law. It's based on a quote from the first chapter of Genesis, which says, and God blessed them, and God said unto them, Be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the fowl of the air and over every living thing that moveth upon the earth. Now, I know that both of us have heard that quote many times in our childhoods. I never thought much about it as a child, but when I became an adult and I stopped accepting this notion, the implications of that quote really bothered me. How about you?
Yeah, very much. And I would say reflecting, looking back, even as a child, I had a lot of conflict around those kinds of teachings because in my experience was so radically different
Mhm.
than that. And while I was a very a compliant child, and that was one of the coping mechanisms that I used to stay safe in that environment. Um, I always had incredibly deep connections and relationships with the animals, the trees. And so I couldn't really reconcile. And of course, I didn't have the language or understanding or tools to reconcile, but I struggled to reconcile those kinds of teachings with the experiences that I was having, which were so deep and so connected. And I grew up in the Midwest, and my grandparents, one set of grandparents had a dairy farm. And I used to love to spend time in the barn with the animals. It was also a way to get away from the humans who were not, the beings that I wanted to be with for a lot of reasons. And I had, incredible experiences with the animals, specifically the barn cats. And, I would say that probably some of my earliest, what I now understand to be mystical experiences, were in the companionship of those beings, and one cat in particular that I had a profound relationship with. And so, the animals and nature and the trees, I would spend as much time as I could just in a tree. I'd climb a tree and, stay there for as long as I could get away with it, right? And so that, it was in such direct conflict with the teachings I was hearing, and also the experiences of the abuse of animals that happened in that environment, along with the abuse of women and children that was so systemic in that culture. It was just at such odds with the experiences that I was having. So yeah, how about you?
Well, very, very much like that. It was always people first, you know, and who really cares what happens with the animals? I did not have the deep intuitive connection with animals that you had. We always had pets, and I've had a dog as long as I can remember. Um, but there was still that basic assumption. And I know that people don't walk around thinking that they have dominion over other animals and other aspects of nature, but it's so ingrained in Western culture that it's almost impossible not to act on that assumption, right?
Mm. Yeah. And I think some people are, will say that consciously and explicitly. But many people, I agree with you, for many people, it's unconscious, but it's so ingrained in our culture, in our systems, in our at every level of our society, at least in Western cultures. And it comes with this assumption, even if people are not in agreement that animals can be used and mistreated however we want to as humans, there's still sometimes an underlying assumption that animals are inferior in some way, and that we are the most highly developed species, the most highly evolved, with our brains, blah 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 blah, and that the I suppose the best expression of that in terms of animal welfare comes with the idea that well, and then we have responsibility to care for animals well, to treat them humanely, but still this hierarchy of species, and not understanding and recognizing our more than human brothers and sisters as fully sentient, aware beings in their own right, with their own lives, their own wisdom, their own awareness, their own intelligence, that, we could talk example after example of the ways in which other than human beings possess understanding and awareness that our species can't even begin to touch,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And so, that's a big part of the work that I do, is just helping people to really understand that while other beings have different bodies, different biological, drives, different purposes. That at that fundamental level, there is, I guess, what we could call soul, right? And awareness and spirituality and understanding and wisdom that is, we are diminished as a species by not recognizing that and being aware of it and being in relationship with it.
Exactly. I could not agree more. And I'm leading into the next question by pointing out, you see a poster behind me, which is the cover of a book that Andrew Harvey and I wrote some years ago called Saving Animals from Ourselves. And that was a real deep dive for both of us into animal consciousness. It's now part of a book that we wrote together, Radical Regeneration. But it's not only animals that the Dominionist perspective says we should have control over, but from the white evangelical point of view, white people should have control over people of color. Men should have control over women. The rich should have control over the poor, and Christians should have control over society. But we miss something in that worldview. And I'm wondering from your perspective, what do we miss by quote unquote having dominion over people and things and
Yeah.
animals?
I mean, it's such a huge question. And, and I kind of want to give it a one-word answer, which is everything. We miss everything,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because then we're just living on this small slice of reality,
Yeah.
which is our own experience and perspective of the world. And so when we don't engage with other humans who are perhaps a different race or from a different culture or a different socioeconomic background or, a different country or whatever it is, we miss those perspectives. We miss those ways of viewing the world, which may be very different than ours and might illuminate huge parts of reality that we don't even know exist, right? And it's the same with other than humans. If we denigrate trees as just resources to be cut down and used, we miss their profound intelligence and wisdom and awareness and what they can teach us, what they can share with us, how we can be in relationship with them. If we denigrate other than human animals, it's the same thing. We miss this, the whole potential of understanding how does another being in another a completely different kind of body than mine, how do they see and view and experience the world? What can they show us about their awareness and their understanding? I've had the privilege of spending a lot of time with whales and dolphins over the last many years. And, the experience of being in their energy and being in their consciousness and being able to tap into their energetic field and have the an understanding through their teaching of what they know, of who they are, of what they're aware of, right? I mean, it's so outside the realm of what most humans experience, except perhaps people who are true spiritual adepts who have engaged in a deep spiritual practice for for decades, right? I mean, it's just astounding. So I mean, the short answer to your question is, what do we miss? Potentially everything,
Yes.
including how to live together in harmony on this earth and how to be in connection with each other and all life.
Well, speaking of connection, the dominionist perspective is not relational. It assumes that the controller has nothing to learn from the other person or the aspect of nature that they're dominating. And I'm sure you agree that our planet is withering and dying because of this dominionist worldview. It's the absolute opposite perspective of the indigenous assumption that we're part of nature, not separated from it or outside it. So that our job is to control it. So I'm very curious about how you work with animals and with people in relation to their animals, because this not only benefits the animals, but also the humans. Can you say more about that?
Yeah, I mean, relationship is everything, right?
Yeah.
And your point is exactly it, that when we're in this hierarchical relationship, the dominionist perspective, right, where it truncates all the possibilities for a relationship.
Yeah.
And when we are able to step outside of that and open to the possibility that there is more, and in fact there's universe is more, right?
Mhm.
Then everything changes, right? And it becomes this transformational potentially experience. So in terms of my work, I agree with you completely that uh, this way of understanding and being open to being in connection and communication really has the potential to change lives of all species involved, right? And so, when I'm working with a large part of my work, as you know, is consultations with animals and their human companions, right? And it's it's the humans who reach out and make contact with me to help in understanding their animal companions. Sometimes it's around behavior issues or illness, end of life decisions, from those kinds of practical physical world questions to the deeper questions of soul purpose and relationship and depth of perception and understanding. And so I view my work, my job is to be a translator. And I use what I call the universal language. It's the language of telepathic communication, which is basically sensing and feeling another being's perspective across a distance. That's the if you think about the word telepathy, the tele is the distance and the pathy is the feeling. It's feeling across a distance, right? And so it's not a woo-woo thing that is, some strange thing that only, certain people can do. I feel very strongly that this is a universal language that all species share. It's the language that's underneath, our species languages, which we all have. But this universal language allows us to understand one another across all kinds of types of distance. So not only time and space, but across the distance of species and experience, right? And of course, we can also experience this with other humans. And many people have, experienced this in close relationships or with their children or, and with their partners. So in terms of the work with companion animals and their humans, I view my job as just to translate. That's my role. I'm the translator, but in doing that, then the bridges of understanding are built, right? So helping somebody understand what their companion animal is, what's going on for them with a particular behavior from their perspective, why they're doing something, right? Why is the cat not using the litter box? Use a really common example, right? What's going on from their perspective? How do they view the world? How are they experiencing themselves and their body? All of those kinds of things. Then the human person can understand. And it can go the other way too, helping an animal understand what's going on from a human's perspective.
Mhm.
And that could be around emotions, feelings, life changes, there's really no limit. So that's, kind of the summary of kind of how I view my work in the world, and what my role is in terms of just building bridges of understanding, whether those are, individual relationships, or then in the macro, there are relationship as a human species with the other species that we share the planet with. And, that gets into of course, the bigger questions of the impact that our species has had on the planet and all of the other species that share the planet. And, no individual one of us can solve that problem by ourselves. But if enough people, human people, can learn to speak this universal language, remember it, and understand it, then, possibly we have a prayer of a chance of doing something to shift our out of balance relationships with the other beings that share our planet.
And even if we don't have a prayer of a chance, we can help each other, across species as we face the demise of industrial civilization and the world as we've known it.
Right.
I think it will be very, as things begin to worsen in terms of our environmental situation and political realities and such, I think that it's going to be very important for animals and humans to help each other.
Yeah.
And we're certainly going to see, probably a large death toll on the part of our own species and others. But to be able to have that communication, and I think just to have had the experience of a deep, deep love of an animal companion that has, I know in my case, shattered me a couple of times, but really ultimately opened my heart and shifted my perspective in such important ways. Um, and I'm sure you have a whole perspective and lots of experience on end of life situations with pets and animal companions. Which are absolutely transformative if we allow them to be, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. 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 And I think it's such an important point, Carolyn, because, whatever the details of what unfolds in our world, however things shake out, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Coming back to that, that essential connection of relationship and relationship with each other, whoever the others are, right?
yeah,
In our communities, in our homes, in our families, and having that ability to understand each other and help each other and companion each other.
right.
Whether it's through the end of life, an individual end of life, and as you talk about, that process can be so transformative, so holy,
Mhm.
so beautiful, and through the collective endings of life that we're witnessing and experiencing also on so many levels. And I think I'm thinking back to just your where we started this conversation about, here we sit at the beginning of this year,
Mhm.
and both of us expressing our shared anxiety about what is what's happening, and I think bringing that kind of bringing the circle back around to, why are we talking about evangelical Christianity, fundamentalist Christianity? Why are we talking about Dominionism? Why are we talking about all of that? Because those threads connect, right? And one of the things that I have been very clear about, and am recommitting to as I begin this year, is using my voice when and where I can,
Mhm.
to talk about this and to talk about the, what we're actually facing here, and what the influences are. And there's a lot that I can't do, right?
Yeah.
But I can show up and speak in the ways that I am able to. And I'm committed to that. And I know you are too. And your work has been, I mean, you've been doing that for, years and years and years, right? Through your writing, through your teaching, because that, like, we can't do more than is ours to do, but we must do what is ours to do, right? We've got to show up in the ways that we can. And so that's why, one of the ways that I work with my own anxiety around this is just, okay, I'm willing to show up. I'm willing to talk about it. I'm willing to share my perspective. And that perspective is informed very much by my background, right? And what I learned and what I didn't learn, through that experience.
Yeah. Well, I want to shift the topic just a little bit, but not really. You're a subscriber to my daily news digest, which people can learn more about at my website, carolynbaker.net. And I'm not remembering exactly how we connected, but in doing so, we discovered that we're both part of the LGBTQ community and that we're both recovering from growing up in evangelical families. So, can you say more what is about what it's like for you to, deal with both of those realities? I've written 3 memoirs now on some of my experiences in growing up as a lesbian in an evangelical family, um, which, you know, um, nobody knew, including me, that that was actually happening until I realized it was happening. But now, look, from hindsight, as I'm sure you do as well, realize that it was a powerful, that contrast of growing up being gay in an evangelical family was a huge influence on our lives. So tell me a little bit about your story.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't even have language, until well into my early adulthood, for that experience and for what that was. And what I understood about being gay was solely through the lens of male homosexuality, right?
Yeah.
And because women's sexuality was so non-existent, right? That wasn't even, so I had a lot of experiences that I had to unpack, as I became more aware later in life, of because I would not have had even the language to understand. But what I experienced was a profound feeling of differentness. And that also, I mean, here, I was this sensitive little kid who, wanted to climb in the tree and talk to the cats and herd the dogs, and there was no language for that. The only sliver of understanding that I had of that aspect was, um, I didn't go to public school except for 2 years of my childhood, my first grade and my 12th grade. And in between there, I was in Christian school. So just, even a further limitation of access to the outside world. And within that, of course, there was a high level of control of what we were allowed to read, what we were allowed to study, what we were allowed to access. And of course, this was long before the internet. But one of the, and so, book bans are nothing new.
Right.
Right,
Yeah.
in that world. But one of the books that I was allowed to read, and I'm kind of stunned by this when I think back on it, except that she was a Christian author, though not a fundamentalist Christian or evangelical Christian that I know, were the books of Madeleine L'Engle. And I read the book A Wrinkle in Time,
Mm.
where it was the first time I had language for telepathy and for telepathic communication, because she wrote about that. She
Mhm.
called it tithing, but it was, telepathic communication. And I remember it's a revelation to me, because I went, oh, well, that's what's been happening to me with the animals, right? That's what's been happening with the cat, with the dog. That, oh, this is a thing, right? And I'm reading about it. Yes, it's a fictional book, but it was so real to me, right? So that feeling of that experience of differentness, had a lot of different layers to it. And as I understand, myself and my sexuality now, and my sexual orientation, that was definitely part of the mix, but I didn't have any language for it then, and could not have even imagined that as a possibility. And so, yeah, I mean, I think it had a profound influence, on, when I finally got out, and music was my ticket out. I was a classical pianist, and that was, actually how I was able to get out of that cultic environment, and go to public university on a scholarship, and that kind of opened the doors of my world. And then when that happened, it was actually not as difficult as I might have, one might imagine, for me to open to all the other realms that were available, right? Of understanding myself and understanding the world. But yeah, I kind of lost the thread of your original question, I think, a little bit, but just in terms of that experience of being gay and coming out of that environment, and coming to understand all of the various aspects of ourselves.
Well, I'm sure that for both of us, animals were a comfort in that place of feeling different, because what do they care what we are, right? And so, just having that unconditional love from these other beings, certainly I think supported us and made it easier, not easy, but easier to just endure what we were going through.
Mhm. I mean, the animals saved me, and the trees,
Yeah.
right? And they absolutely saved me. And I don't say that to be dramatic. I think that's actually true.
Yeah.
I don't know that I would have survived, or at least survived, you know, uh, intact, and right,
Yeah.
without having those connections and those kinds of relationships. And uh, it was essential.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, yeah.
Well, I can't tell you, Nancy, how affirming it's been for me to meet you and to have these kinds of conversations as a lesbian, as a former evangelical, and as an animal lover myself. The journeys we've both taken and our work in the world, have certainly made us who we are today. As you well know, it is possible to heal the evangelical wound and to find deep fulfillment in a calling that looks very different from what we may have imagined as adolescents or college students, or just, based on our upbringing. So I really appreciate you, and I appreciate this conversation, and I wish you all the best in 2024.
Thank you, Carolyn. I appreciate you too. And I want to just give a plug for your book, which I actually have sitting right here. And that Carolyn doesn't know I'm going to do this, but if you're interested in learning more about what we're talking about, especially if you're wanting to understand more about this world, or if you're coming out of this world, and wanting to have some framework and some understanding, I think one of the things that your book, I feel, is so vital. One of the ways that it's so vital is that it shows both the historical overlap, right, of these two words, that you put together in the title, Christo-fascism, right? And you really, because you're a historian, have been able to trace that so thoroughly and so beautifully, and to help people to really understand the impacts of what we're facing here at this time, not just here in the US, but all over the world. So I would really encourage people to read the book. And you know, I know that that's, to your earlier point about how did we connect, I think that's, you know, I followed your work for a long time and read many of your books, including the books that you co-authored with Andrew Harvey, and the one that's, you know, where the cover is behind you there on the screen. But when this book came out and I read it, I knew I had to connect with you personally, because it was so profoundly helpful for me in terms of understanding this, you know, the bigger perspective of the framework of what we're in. So yeah, I just want to encourage people to please check it out if you're interested.
Thank you. And would you just say how it's the best way to connect with you?
You can find me at my website, which is nancywindheart.com. And
That's Windheart.
Heart.
Heart, right.
Yeah. And I'm also on the various social media places, YouTube and Facebook and Instagram. And I think that's it.
Well, once again, thank you so much for this time to just really talk and share with folks. And I really wish you all the best in 2024.
Thank you. You too, Carolyn.